This is an easy thing to measure. It is modifiable. There is so much really good evidence about how our bodies improve as we improve our VO2 maxes that, in my opinion, it is mindless to not start working on this. Everybody wants to take some kind of supplement, or they want a biohack, or they want some pill or something that is going to give them longevity and improve health. We have this data about VO2 max, which is irrefutable. This is not anything theoretical that I am sharing with you. These are things that we actually know that have been done in clinical trials with humans. So if you don't know what your VO2 max is, find out. You can use the estimate on some of these wearable devices that we have. And if that's what you want to use it. I don't care. It's a starting point. And then start making the changes to do what you need to do to make sure your VO2 max is high enough now in order to decline in a certain way so that you can do what you want to do when you get older. Welcome to No Filter Doctor, where we cut through the health hype, dig into what's real, what's backed by evidence, and what works. I'm your host, Dr. AK. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back. Thank you for joining me again this week. This week's topic is a long overdue and was an oversight, so many apologies. I think I've mentioned VO2 max in 70% of the podcasts that I've done, but I never actually did a podcast on VO2 max. So today I want to take the time on discussing what is it? Why does it matter? How do we measure ours? And what are the things that we can do to improve it? So let's start with what is VO2 max? It is the highest rate at which your body can deliver and utilize oxygen during intense exercise. And it's a very nice reflection of cardiorespiratory fitness. We can determine a lot in terms of the efficiency at which our heart, our lungs, and our skeletal muscles work when we are looking at VO2 max. This all comes into play with regard to making ATP. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and it is the energy molecule that our body uses for everything. You cannot be alive and not be able to produce ATP. It generally is formed in the mitochondria of our cells, and it can be made in two different pathways. There is one that utilizes oxygen and one that doesn't utilize oxygen. The one that utilizes oxygen is very efficient, and you can get 36 to 38 molecules of ATP down that pathway. And what VO2 max is the rate at which that oxygen is delivered and utilized to make ATP in the mitochondria. When VO2 max is high, the body can stay in that oxygen-dependent pathway to make ATP. When it is not, our bodies are going to go down the non-oxygen pathway, and that's the pathway that uses lactate to make ATP, and it is extremely inefficient, producing about 2 molecules of ATP. So in summary, when your VO2 max is high, you can stay in that pathway that makes the 36 to 38 molecules of ATP versus going down the pathway that only makes 2 molecules of ATP. And if you're a visual learner, I created this little chart on the blog that you can look at, and it shows you the 2 pathways, the one that uses oxygen, the one that does not, and their ATP production and kind of the other things that are involved. It's very, very simple. It's not anything that is overwhelming to look at, but it can give you a visual representation of what it is that I just described. The gold standard way of measuring a VO2 max is through direct gas measurements through the breath. So what you'll typically see is somebody wears a mask on their face, and then they get on a treadmill or an exercise bike, and while they're doing the tests, there are different sensors in the mask that measure the gases, and then it goes and tells the computer what the measurements are, and that's how you determine your VO2 max. There are other surrogates. So a lot of wearable devices such as an Apple Watch and some of these other technologies that use red light in order to get different measurements in our body, they can track a VO2 max as well, but it's not accurate. It's not going to be nearly as accurate as the direct measurement with the mask that you're wearing. However, I will say this, not everybody can or wants to do a VO2 max test. And I understand that because it is challenging. It's not an easy test to do. It's only about 5 minutes, but it's a challenging 5 minutes. So if you wanted to get a general idea and maybe use one of those tracking methods in order to trend what your VO2 max does over time, I think that's fine. And you might be wondering, well, why do I even want to get a VO2 max measured? It matters because there are several studies that have linked VO2 max levels to functional independence, all-cause mortality, chronic disease, and longevity. We have a lot of people who are always trying to reach for these different things that will offer longevity. Modifying the VO2 max is one of those things. There is a study that looked at 4,808 men and women, and what they were doing was measuring their cardiorespiratory fitness through VO2 max and then looking at mortality. That study found that early adulthood fitness was associated with a lower risk of all-cause mortality and cardiovascular events. Not to worry, if you are in your early adulthood and you are not particularly fit, it's not too late. A separate study demonstrated that for every 1 ml per kilo per minute increase in VO2 max, there was a 9% decrease in relative risk for all-cause mortality. And another paper that was published in JAMA demonstrated there is no ceiling for a VO2 max. The higher it goes, the better your cardiovascular fitness and the lower your all-cause mortality. And there are other studies that found similar findings whenever we're looking at VO2 max and things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and type 2 diabetes. There's also some evidence that some of the hallmarks of aging can be reversed with increased VO2 max. Now, we talked about the hallmarks of aging in our biology of aging. Increasing VO2 max can lead to increased mitochondrial biogenesis, enzyme activity, and turnover in both young and older adults. It's also associated with longer telomere ends and less telomere attrition. And there's additional data that suggests when you improve the mitochondria with this increased VO2 max, you then improve autophagy and reduce oxidative stress. So there are a lot of really great things that can happen whenever we're trying to increase our VO2 max. And just like a lot of other things that happen in our body as we age, VO2 max is another one of those parameters that will gradually decline as we get older. And so this is important when it comes to what we want to do in the future. So one of the things, I have this program where I work with people to basically help plan their health out in the future. And one of the things I ask them is, what do you want to be able to do at what age? If you had this perfect image of what your life would be like when you are older, what would that be? And it has to be within reason. Like if someone's like, well, I want to be 150 years old and be able to run a marathon. I'm like, well, that's probably not going to happen during my lifetime or yours. So within reason, what is it that you want to be able to do? And a lot of times I'll get things like, I want to be able to still run on a treadmill when I'm 80. I want to be able to golf. I want to be able to pick my grandkids up. I want to be able to run with my suitcase through the airport if I need to for travel. Depending on what those different desires are and at what age people hope to live to, we can determine what your VO2 max needs to be now so that we can do the things now to slow that decline over time and ensure that at minimum, with everything else that's going on in our bodies as we get older, we can at least have a VO2 max that will allow us to be independent and reach our goals. I will share with you my VO2 max journey to better illustrate what I'm talking about here. So when I first started tracking my VO2 max, I was 47. And my VO2 max was 36.7 at that time. Research demonstrates that a VO2 max declines at about 8% per year once we hit 30. And that can actually jump up to 20% per decade once we're in our 50s if we're sedentary. So if I use the percentages that I just shared with you, that would suggest that when I'm 50, my VO2 max will drop down to 35.8. At 80, it would be 19.5. Studies demonstrate that women need a VO2 max of 15 ml per kilo per minute in order to function independently, and men need to be at 18 ml per kilo per minute to function independently. So my value of 19.5 puts me above that threshold for functional independence. And while that's great that I have an estimated VO2 max that'll have me above that threshold for functional independence, I'm not happy with that, because if I can increase my VO2 max even higher now, then I'm going to be even better whenever I get older. So I have been putting a lot of work into increasing my VO2 max, and now it's up to about an estimated 37.4. The trajectory of what our VO2 max is going to do really is dependent on what we're doing now to influence it and how we can change it. So I got a year older, but my VO2 max actually went up instead of decreasing because of the work and the effort that I'm putting into increasing it. Which leads us to, well, how do we increase a VO2 max then? Obviously, exercise. I shared with you before how much I hate exercising, but I'm a very goal-oriented person. And I created the goal for myself that I want a VO2 max of 40 by the time I'm 50 years of age. And so that helps keep me motivated to do the exercise. I've done the same stuff with strength training and muscle mass because I, again, hate doing that too. So this is what works for me. You can find your own different way, but there are a bunch of different ways that we can increase that VO2 max with exercise. Now, the one that's been studied the most is the high intensity interval training sessions. That is where you get your biggest bang for your buck in terms of biggest change for the effort that you put in. A lot of the changes can be seen after about 4 weeks of dedicated effort and exercise. Now, in older, more sedentary people, it can take a lot longer and it can be somewhere closer to 30 weeks. But you can still see an improvement. However, high intensity interval training is not for everyone. And so that's where I start to lean into the zone 2 training more. So for people who would consider themselves out of shape or people who are relatively sedentary, I am not going to tell them to go from 0 to 2 HIIT workouts per week. That is crazy. It is going to be exhausting. They're not used to it. And in the end, they're just going to stop. So if you fall into that category, I like to advise my patients to consider more zone 2 exercise. If we use the Maffetone equation, it's going to be 180 minus your age, and then you add some heartbeats or decrease some heartbeats depending on what your overall fitness is. That heart range that you get is what your target heart rate is going to be for zone 2 exercise. The other thing you can do is you can look at rate of perceived exertion. So let's say I'm walking with one of my friends. We're doing a zone 2 workout. We're walking. We're doing some hills. We should be able to have a conversation with one another. It's breathy. You can tell that we're putting some work into it, but you can talk. However, if for whatever reason either one of us would want to bust it out in song, we would not be able to start singing songs to one another at that zone 2 level of effort. So those are 2 different ways of measuring zone 2. And I'm so passionate about VO2 max coming up that I would say even if you do nothing, go walk for 5 minutes, because that 5 minutes is more than nothing. And that 5 minutes is doing more than you think. It is actually helping your body out in different ways from a physiological and molecular standpoint, but it's starting to create movement as part of your life. And when you do that, you can gradually creep up in your level of intensity, where if you want to get to that high intensity interval training, then you'll be able to, because you've dedicated the time and you've done the work up until that point. So what I typically like to do is I like to know the goal. I like to know the age of that goal. And I like to know the current VO2 max. So I bring people in my office, we put the mask on them, we do the test, and we see what is the current VO2 max. Because it might not be what it needs to be now in order for people to do the things they want to do as they get older and we have work to do. And now we can put together a plan that someone can follow over a longer period of time in order to reach whatever that goal is that they want at their specified age. I really just love VO2 Max. This is an easy thing to measure. It is modifiable. There is so much really good evidence about how our bodies improve as we improve our VO2 maxes that, in my opinion, it is mindless to not start working on this. Everybody wants to take some kind of supplement, or they want a biohack, or they want some pill or something that is going to give them longevity and improve health. We have this data about VO2 max, which is irrefutable. This is not anything theoretical that I am sharing with you. These are things that we actually know that have been done in clinical trials with humans. So if you don't know what your VO2 max is, find out. You can use the estimate on some of these wearable devices that we have. And if that's what you want to use it. I don't care. It's a starting point. And then start making the changes to do what you need to do to make sure your VO2 max is high enough now in order to decline in a certain way so that you can do what you want to do when you get older. And that is where I'm going to leave you, my friends, when it comes to VO2 max. As always, I would love to hear from you. I'm sure there are many of you who are listening who also have some insights on VO2 max. Please share, please comment. I love learning things that my patients share with me in the office. I would love to hear what your thoughts are. And until then, I will talk to you next week. Take care. Thank you so much for joining me on this week's No Filter Doctor. If you enjoyed the content, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can also go to www.thewholehumanhealthandwellbeing.com and sign up for the weekly newsletter, where you will get a link to the blog, that week's podcast, and a health tip of the week sent directly to you. It's important to know that while I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and it's not intended as medical advice. Listening to this podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. The information discussed should not be used to diagnose, treat, or prevent any medical condition, nor should it replace individualized medical care. If you have questions or concerns about your health, please contact your own healthcare provider. Any decisions to delay or forego a medical evaluation or treatment based on the information discussed in this podcast are made so at your own risk. My only financial disclosure is my medical practice, The Whole Human Health and Wellbeing. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week.